Silence is not the absence of sound, it's the presence of awareness. When you slow down enough to listen, the noise inside begins to fade. In those moments, your thoughts soften, your breathing deepens. You start to hear something subtle, a whisper of peace. It's in the pause between heartbeats, in the space between words. The universe speaks through this quiet rhythm. You realize that you don't always need more answers, you need more silence. Because silence teaches you to be with yourself. It shows you that you were never lost, only distracted. And in that stillness, your soul finally feels heard. The world outside may rush, but your spirit stands still. You begin to see that peace was never out there, it was always within. Each moment of quiet becomes a gentle healing. And you discover, silence isn't empty. It's full of truth. It's full of you. We are surrounded by noise, not just the external kind. There's noise in our thoughts, our expectations, our constant need to respond. We fill silence because we fear what it might reveal. We run from quiet moments because they show us ourselves. But silence doesn't judge. It just reflects. And reflection can feel uncomfortable when you're used to distraction. Yet, this is where transformation begins. When you stop running from silence, you start meeting your truth. You meet the version of yourself that hides behind words and labels. You meet your real emotions, unfiltered and raw. Silence invites you to sit with them. To understand, not escape. It whispers, be patient. Healing needs quiet. And when you finally surrender, peace walks in softly. Unannounced. But deeply felt. True listening doesn't happen through ears, it happens through presence. Most people hear to respond, not to understand. But when you listen in silence, you connect deeply. You hear the unspoken, the emotion beneath words. You sense the energy of someone's heart. That's what silence teaches, empathy without effort. It's the bridge between souls. You learn to pause before reacting. To observe without assuming. To respond from calm instead of chaos. Silence doesn't make you distant, it makes you wise. It reminds you that peace is a choice, not a gift. That you can listen to pain without becoming it. And that understanding often blooms in the quiet spaces between sentences. When you listen deeply, you heal quietly. A young seeker once went to a monk and asked, "Master, how can I find peace?" The monk smiled and said nothing. They sat together in silence as the wind rustled through the trees. Minutes passed, then hours. The seeker grew restless. "Why won't you answer me?" he asked. The monk finally whispered, "I did." The seeker didn't understand, until he noticed his own calm. The silence had stilled his mind. Peace had arrived, not through words, but through presence. He realized that silence was not the path to peace, it was peace. And from that day, he stopped seeking and started listening. Sometimes the answer isn't spoken, it's felt. And silence is the language of the soul. When everything outside goes quiet, your inner voice grows clearer. It doesn't shout, it guides gently. It's the whisper that says, "Trust yourself." It's the nudge that reminds you when something feels off. We often drown it with overthinking. But intuition doesn't compete for your attention, it waits for your silence. It knows when to speak, when to rest, when to act. In silence, you reconnect with that sacred guidance. You start making decisions that feel aligned, not forced. You begin to walk lighter. Because you're no longer guessing, you're remembering. That inner knowing was always there. You just needed to turn down the volume of the world. Silence lets you hear your truth again. And truth always sounds like peace. Healing isn't loud. It happens softly, in the moments when you sit with your own heart. When you breathe deeply instead of rushing to fix. Silence lets emotions rise and release. It gives grief a voice, and pain a way out. Sometimes the tears you shed in silence are sacred. They're your soul cleansing itself. Every quiet night spent alone is a chapter of becoming whole. You're not breaking, you're unfolding. Silence becomes your sanctuary. It's where the light re-enters after the storm. It's where you remember your strength. Healing doesn't need noise, it needs honesty. And honesty speaks in whispers, not words. The quiet heals what noise cannot touch. Sometimes, the best thing you can say is nothing. Not every moment needs to be filled. Silence in relationships can hold more love than 1,000 words. It teaches patience, respect, and presence. It allows space for understanding to grow. True connection doesn't always need conversation, it needs calm energy. Sitting quietly beside someone can be the deepest form of communication. It's saying, "You're safe here," without speaking. Silence reveals what words can't: sincerity, care, truth. When you stop needing to explain everything, love feels lighter. Because the right souls understand your silence too. They don't ask for more, they simply listen with their hearts. That's where real intimacy begins, in peaceful presence. In shared stillness, souls speak. And sometimes, that's all that's needed. There was once a painter who stopped speaking for a year. People thought he was broken, but he was simply listening. Every day, he sat by his window and painted the sunrise. When asked why he chose silence, he wrote, "Words limit what I feel. Silence paints it." At the end of the year, his art spoke louder than his voice ever could. Each stroke carried peace, sadness, joy, and truth. He had learned that silence wasn't emptiness, it was expression in its purest form. His silence had become his language. And those who saw his art understood his soul. Sometimes silence doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be felt. Because silence, too, can be a masterpiece. At first, silence feels heavy. It reminds you of loneliness and things you don't want to face. But the more time you spend in it, the softer it becomes. You start to see it as a companion, not an enemy. It holds space for you when no one else does. It listens when words fail. You stop fearing your own thoughts and start embracing them. Because silence isn't isolation, it's restoration. It gives you the strength to return to the world with clarity. To speak less but mean more. To live slower but feel deeper. You become rooted, centered, whole. Silence becomes your daily meditation. Your peace no longer depends on noise. It lives quietly, within. In silence, you meet yourself again. You realize you were never waiting for an answer, you were waiting to listen. The truth doesn't shout, it whispers. And when you're ready, silence becomes your teacher. It shows you the beauty of doing nothing, of simply being. You start living intentionally, breathing consciously, loving quietly. The noise of the world fades, and your soul takes the microphone. It says, "You are enough. You always were." Silence isn't the end of conversation, it's the beginning of understanding. It's the sound of peace returning home. So whenever life gets too loud, find a quiet place. Close your eyes. Listen deeply. Because sometimes, silence says everything you need to hear.